The clock on the terminal wall said 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes left. Adiz Nwasu did not look at the clock again. She had made a decision, somewhere around hour 16 of her shift, that looking at the clock was a thing she could no longer afford. It made her hands shake. Her hands were not allowed to shake. She was the last gate officer on the last boarding ramp on the last ship leaving Earth, and shaking hands were not in the job description. She checked her tablet instead. Manifest. 4,211 names. 4,211 bodies now seated, strapped, breathing recycled air in the belly of the Covenant, the final evacuation vessel in the Galactic Consortium's 31st Species Relocation Program. Humanity's column in the ledger. Neat. Accounted for.
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Sci-Fi HFY Stories. Please don't forget, like, comment and share this video. Thank you.
She tapped her father's wristwatch against her thigh. Tick, tick, tick. The boarding terminal was enormous and completely empty now. 6 months ago, it had been a city inside a building, 40,000 people moving through every day, luggage and children and arguments, and a kind of frantic animal noise that Adiz had learned to stop hearing just to survive her shifts. Now the sound was gone. The lights above the empty seats hummed. A paper cup rolled across the floor in a draft from somewhere, and the sound of it was so loud in the silence that Adiz turned to look at it like it had said her name. She was the only human left in the terminal. Not the only person. The consortium observers stood near the signing table at the far end of the hall, 3 of them. Tall, pale, built like something that had decided to be humanoid as a professional courtesy. They wore identical dark suits and identical expressions of patient, courteous boredom. They had supervised 30 species evacuations before this one. To them, this was Tuesday. The one in the center, he had told her his name once, something with too many consonants. She called him the tall one in her head, checked his own tablet and looked up. Commander Nwasu, we are ready for the final protocol. Adiz walked across the empty terminal. Her boots made too much noise. She thought about how this floor had been impossible to cross 6 months ago, bodies and bags in every direction. A woman crying near Gate 7 every single morning for 3 weeks. A little boy who had left his stuffed bear behind the barrier and screamed until a security officer broke protocol and retrieved it. She thought about the bear. She wondered which ship the boy was on. She reached the signing table. The abandonment accord was already open, a physical document, because the consortium insisted on physical documents for species-level events. Something about permanence, something about the weight of things. The page was thick and cream-colored and smelled like nothing she could identify. Every species that had ever fled a dying world had signed somewhere on its pages. She had been told that once. She tried to find the other signatures now and couldn't read any of them. Standard procedure, the tall one said, guiding the pen toward her. Signing acknowledges the voluntary cessation of territorial claim. Earth is formally released from human governance. The consortium assumes administrative dormancy status for the Sol system. You understand the terms. I understand them, Adiz said. She held the pen. The tall one waited. She did not sign. Commander. One moment. She set the pen down. The tall one made a sound that was not quite a sigh. Commander, the departure window. One moment, she said again quietly, and her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that, and she thought her father would have been proud of that too, and she pressed her thumb against the face of his watch and felt the small, steady pulse of it against her skin. She looked at the document. She thought about her mother's garden in Enugu, the particular red of that soil, the way the tomatoes had grown against the back fence every summer until they hadn't any more. She thought about the Atlantic, which she had not seen in 4 years because the coast was not safe anymore, the surge lines too unpredictable. She thought about 1,000 things she had never said out loud because saying them out loud would have made them into losses, and she had not had time for losses. She picked up the pen, she signed. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her uniform jacket and removed a single folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was handwritten, 3 sentences. She placed it on the table. The tall one looked at it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened the way a light sharpens when you turn up its dial. "This is non-standard," he said. "Yes," said Adiz. "The Accord is a closed document. Amendments require." "Consortium Charter, Article 9, Subsection 4, said Adiz. "Any signatory species may append a single cultural notation to their evacuation record, non-binding in consortium law, binding in the species' own cultural and legal tradition. You've used the clause before. The Dravathi appended one, so did the Ulari." A pause. Those were ceremonial notations. "So is this." He looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at the paper. She watched him read it. He read it again. One of the other observers leaned over and read it. They exchanged a look she couldn't decode. "This is," the tall one said carefully, "an unusual notation. We are an unusual species." Another pause. He picked up his own pen and initialed the amendment. It was appended to the Accord. Done. 3 sentences handwritten on a page that would outlast the building they were standing in. Adiz folded her hands in front of her. "Is there anything else?" she asked. "No," the tall one said. "The protocol is complete. You should board." She nodded. She took one step toward the ramp, then she stopped. She turned around and looked at the terminal. All of it. The empty seats and the dead screens and the paper cup still rolling slowly near Gate 3. The humming lights. The floor she had crossed 10,000 times in 6 months. The big windows on the eastern wall, and through them, in the dark, the shape of a city still lit, some of it, running on automated systems that would keep running for a while yet, because that was the kind of thing humans built. Things that kept going. She stood there for exactly as long as she could afford. Then she walked up the ramp. The door sealed behind her. 300 meters away, in the consortium's mobile command post, a junior records clerk processed the final paperwork for humanity's evacuation. He was filing the amendment notation, standard procedure, non-binding cultural appendage, shelf it and move on, when he paused and read it one more time. He had processed 30 species evacuations. He had read many cultural notations, prayers mostly, poems, the occasional list of names. He had never read one like this. He read it a 3rd time, then set it in the file, then sat quietly for a moment doing nothing, which was not like him at all. Earth is not abandoned. She is left in trust. No force in this galaxy shall touch her until she calls us home or the stars go dark, whichever comes first. He closed the file. Outside, the covenant lifted. Below, Earth turned in the dark, slow and patient, already beginning something the humans who had just left it would not see for a very long time. She had work to do. She got started. Saren Adami had a system. Every morning she arrived at her desk on the 14th floor of the Human Colonial Delegate Office on Kepler 9b at exactly 7:15. She made coffee, real coffee, the expensive kind, the kind that still tasted faintly of something she had never actually visited but somehow recognized, and she opened her filing queue and she worked through it from top to bottom without stopping. No prioritizing, no cherry-picking, top to bottom. Everything got the same attention. Everything got processed. This was how she had made senior delegate at 34. This was how she had survived 11 years in consortium bureaucracy, which was the political equivalent of swimming in a river that was always, quietly, trying to drown you. She was good at her job. She was known for being good at her job. More specifically, she was known for being the delegate who did not get emotional about things, which in the consortium's multi-species political ecosystem was considered a significant professional asset. She opened her queue on a Tuesday morning in the 180th year after the Exodus. 43 items. routine, trade corridor adjustments, 2 colony boundary disputes, a consortium infrastructure proposal for the outer Kepler belt. She processed them one by one, making notes, flagging 3 for follow-up, finishing her coffee. Item 31 was a resource extraction petition. She opened it. 6,400 pages. The Vreth Collective, she knew them, silicon-based. Ancient, the kind of species that had been doing resource extraction before Earth's sun had finished forming. They filed these petitions the way other species filed tax returns, efficiently, without sentiment. The Sol system had been on their geological survey list for a long time. Now they were moving on it. She scrolled, trade route data, mineral surveys, legal framework citations, jurisdiction maps, Standard Reclamation Clause 7, which applied to any uninhabited system abandoned by its native species for more than 100 years. Everything clean, everything by the book. Paragraph 14. She almost scrolled past it. Earth, third planet Sol system. Status, uninhabited. Biologically dormant per last consortium survey, year 147 post-Exodus. Atmosphere, non-viable for complex life. Eligible for reclamation under Standard Clause 7. Estimated mineral extraction yield, Class 4 operations. No prior consortium resource claims. Proceeding. She read it. Her hand stopped moving. She read it again. Biologically dormant, non-viable proceeding. Saren set her coffee down. She pulled up a separate database. The consortium's automated environmental monitoring records, passive satellites left in orbit around abandoned worlds, standard procedure, nobody usually looked at them. She typed in Sol. She typed in Earth. The data went back 180 years. She opened the atmospheric reports. Year 1 was bad, acidic, depleted, wrong in every measurable way. Year 10 was slightly less bad. Year 30 she sat up straighter. Year 50 she leaned forward. By year 100 she was standing, which she did not realize until she noticed her chair had rolled backward behind her. The ozone layer was patching, slowly, imperfectly, like a wound closing over, not clean, not pretty, but closing. The ocean pH data, year 80, year 110, year 150. Recovering. Not recovered. Not safe, not anywhere close to what it had been, but the numbers were moving in one direction, and that direction was not the direction everyone had predicted when they left. She pulled the last satellite image, taken 11 months ago. Earth from orbit, the equatorial band green, not everywhere, not the lush thick green of old photographs she had seen in textbooks. Patchy, stubborn, real. The Atlantic. That specific, impossible blue. Saren sat back down. She stayed very still for a while. Through the window of her office, Kepler 9b's amber sky was doing the thing it did in mid-morning, the light turning the whole city the color of warm metal, and it was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. She had lived her whole life under that amber sky and never wanted for anything it could give her. Her hands were cold. She went back to paragraph 14, biologically dormant. The satellite image was 11 months old. Had the Vreth seen it? Had the consortium? Had anyone updated the survey data before filing? She opened a search for the abandonment accord. She had read it before. Once, years ago, as part of her training. She found the amendment. Humanity's 3-sentence cultural notation, filed 180 years ago by a gate officer named Adiz Nwasu, initialed by a consortium legal observer whose name she didn't recognize. No force in this galaxy shall touch her until she calls us home or the stars go dark. Saren read it 3 times. Then she filed a formal counterpetition. It took her 4 minutes to write. She cited the amendment. She cited the updated atmospheric data. She cited the satellite imagery. She submitted it through the standard consortium legal channel, marked urgent, and sat back and waited. The automated response arrived in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Counterpetition reviewed. Amendment notation on file classified as non-binding cultural appendage per Consortium Charter Article 9. Standard Reclamation Clause 7 supersedes cultural notations in cases of uninhabited system resource allocation. Vreth Collective Petition approved pending 90-day contestation window. Standard reclamation may proceed upon window expiration. Non-binding. Cultural appendage. She read those 2 words for a long time. She thought about her training. She thought about 11 years of being the delegate who did not get emotional about things. She thought about the amber sky and the city outside her window and the life she had built on a planet she had been born on, which was a thing she had always taken completely for granted because there had never been a reason not to. She thought about the Atlantic. That blue. She picked up her comm and called her grandmother. Her grandmother, Adenola Adami, was 97 years old and lived in New Lagos Colony in a small house that was too full of things. Photographs on every wall, objects on every surface, a kitchen that always smelled of something cooking even when nothing was cooking. Saren visited twice a year and always left feeling crowded and warm and slightly undone in ways she couldn't explain. The call connected. Her grandmother's face on screen, small, sharp-eyed, the kind of old that looked like it had been negotiated with and won. Saren, it's early. I know, I'm sorry. Saren paused. I need to tell you something. She told her all of it, the petition, the paragraph, the atmospheric data, the amendment, the 4-minute response. She talked for a long time and her grandmother listened without interrupting, which was unusual because her grandmother interrupted everything. When Saren finished, the line was quiet. The Atlantic is coming back, her grandmother said. The data suggests. The Atlantic is coming back, her grandmother said again, not a question, saying it like she was putting it somewhere it would stay. Silence. They called the rule a cultural appendage, Saren said. Her grandmother made a sound, short and low and not polite. Nana. Baby, her grandmother said, you need to make some calls. Saren opened her mouth, closed it. Outside, the amber light was moving across the city, slow and golden, the way it always did, the way it would keep doing long after she was gone. There are 11 colonies, she said. Half of them will refuse, the consortium will say. I know what the consortium will say. Her grandmother's voice was not angry. It was something older than angry and quieter. Make the calls anyway. The line stayed open a moment longer. Then Saren closed her counterpetition file, opened a new one, and began to write. She worked through the rest of the day without stopping. She did not think about her system. She did not work top to bottom. She did not think about being known as the delegate who did not get emotional about things, because somewhere between paragraph 14 and the image of the Atlantic from orbit, that reputation had quietly stopped feeling like the most important thing about her. She made the calls. The first meeting lasted 9 hours and resolved nothing. Saren had expected that. She had not expected the volume. 11 colony worlds, 11 delegations, some in person, most on-screen, all of them talking at once with the particular confidence of people who had been waiting for someone to start this conversation, so they could tell them exactly why they were doing it wrong. New Lagos wanted to file military intent immediately. New Helsinki wanted 3 more legal review panels. The Martian Remnant Collective, humans who had briefly colonized Mars before Earth's collapse and now carried a secondary, complicated grief that nobody else quite understood, wanted to do nothing, because wanting things had cost them everything once and they had not forgotten. The Jovian Station representatives showed up late and then argued about the time zone conversion. By hour 4, 2 delegations were arguing with each other instead of engaging the main question. By hour 6, someone had cried, and someone else had told them that crying was not a geopolitical strategy. By hour 8, Saren had a headache that sat behind her eyes like a warm stone. By hour 9, they had agreed on exactly one thing: they needed to meet again. She was not discouraged. This was how humans worked. They were loud before they were decided. You had to let the volume happen. You could not skip it. She booked the second meeting, then a third, then a fourth. Between the meetings, she traveled. Nueva Cartagena colony was warm in a way that reminded everyone who visited of somewhere else they couldn't name. The light had a particular weight to it. The streets near the port smelled like salt even though the nearest ocean was 400 kilometers inland. Something about the mineral content of the air. A local scientist had explained it once, but the explanation never stuck. People just said it smelled like the coast. Nobody asked which coast. Tomás Vigos lived on the third floor of a narrow building near the old market. He was 138 years old, which in the current era of colonial medicine meant he looked roughly like a man in his mid-70s, sharp-faced, slow-moving, with the particular stillness of someone who had decided, long ago, that stillness was worth more than hurry. His mother had been a D's Nwasu, the last gate officer, the woman who had handed over the pen and then put it down and reached into her jacket and changed the shape of what came after. He did not talk about this often. He did not need to. People who knew. People who didn't could find out from the history files. Saren sat across from him at his small kitchen table. He had made tea. Real tea from a plant he grew on his windowsill, something with broad, dark leaves she didn't recognize. She told him what she had told the meetings, the petition, the paragraph, the response, the 90-day window. He listened the way old people listen, when they have heard many things, and learned to let them settle before speaking. When she finished, he reached over to his desk. She had noticed the desk immediately when she came in and picked up the object that sat in the middle of it. A glass jar, sealed, containing dark red soil, completely inert. Irradiated to sterility years ago, he had told her when she asked. Completely useless. His mother had carried it in her coat pocket on the day she left. He held it while he talked. He didn't seem to notice he was doing it. She never told me what it was like, he said. The terminal, the signing. I used to ask when I was small and she would start to answer and then she would stop and do something else. I stopped asking eventually. He turned the jar in his hands. She did tell me one thing. She said the floor in the terminal was very loud when it was empty, that she had never noticed the sound of it before when it was full of people. You don't hear floors when people are on them. Saren looked at the jar. She carried that the whole way, she said. Pocket the whole flight, 11 months of transit. Customs tried to confiscate it. She was very firm with customs. He set the jar back on the desk. The soil is from Enugu, her mother's garden, tomatoes. Saren didn't say anything. What do you need from me? He asked. I need you to come to the next meeting, she said. I need them to see you. He was quiet for a moment. I don't travel. I know. My joints are not cooperative. I know. He looked at her, she looked back. The Vreth think the amendment is a feeling, she said. The consortium thinks it's a feeling. I need them to understand it's a fact. But first I need us to understand it. And I think, she stopped, started again. I think when you walk into a room, people understand something they don't have a word for, and I need them to understand it before they vote. He was quiet for a long time. He picked up the jar again. He didn't seem to notice. Fine, he said. I'll need an aisle seat. The fifth meeting was different. Tomás did not give a speech. He sat at the table and answered questions, and when people spoke too loudly at each other, he would put the jar down on the table, and the sound of it was small and final, and the volume dropped without him saying a word. Colonel Priya Akafor from New Helsinki had been the hardest voice to move. She was not sentimental. She was the kind of person who had been built by hard places into something that worked very well and didn't bend. She had spent the first 4 meetings asking for data, projections, risk assessments. Saren had provided everything she asked for. In the fifth meeting, HFY looked at Tamaz for a long time. She looked at the jar. Then she asked the question that nobody else had managed to say cleanly. "I want to know what we are actually deciding," she said. "Not legally, not politically. What we are deciding, because I have looked at this from every angle and here is what I see. We have 11 colony worlds, ships built for trade and transport, crews trained for peacetime, and we are considering positioning them between an ancient resource extraction civilization and a rock none of us were born on." She paused. "I need someone to explain to me why that is not completely irrational." The room was quiet. Tamaz looked at her. "It's completely irrational," he said. HFY blinked. "The question," he said, "is not whether it's rational. The question is whether we are the kind of people who look at that jar and feel something or the kind of people who look at it and don't." He set it on the table. "If we are the first kind, then we already know what we are deciding. We are just arguing about being afraid of it, which is fine. Being afraid of it is honest." He folded his hands. "If we are the second kind, then the consortium is right. The amendment is just a feeling, and feelings don't hold territory, and we should all go home." The room stayed quiet. HFY looked at the jar for a long time. Then she looked at Saren. "What is the actual vote?" she said. "To formally contest the Vreth petition," Saren said, "with force implied." "With force implied," HFY repeated. "Meaning if they proceed past the 90-day window, we are in front of them." "Yes." "Understood." She picked up her pen. "Call the vote." The motion passed. 11 delegations, 2 votes over the threshold required. One of those votes was HFY's. The consortium sent a formal acknowledgement of humanity's contestation. It was polite. It was brief. It noted the 90-day window and wished the delegations well in their consideration. What it did not say, but what everyone in the room understood, the consortium expected humans to make noise for 90 days and then stand down. They had seen it before. Species grieved. Species protested. Species ultimately accepted outcomes. They had never supervised a species that spent 180 years teaching its children to feel something for a place they had never been. They had not modeled for that. Saren flew back to Kepler 9b. She opened her queue, 47 items. She ignored all of them and started writing procurement requests for 11 colonial shipyards. 90 days. She had work to do. The consortium's intelligence report on human military mobilization was 3 pages long and concluded, with the measured confidence of a body that had supervised 31 species evacuations, that the probability of sustained military engagement was 4%. The report was thorough. It noted that humanity's colonial fleet was built for trade. It noted that 11 different colony worlds built ships to 11 different specifications, meaning no shared parts, no shared systems, limited coordinated tactical capacity. It noted that humans had no unified military command structure. Each colony maintained its own defense force, governed by its own charter, answering to its own elected body. Getting them to agree on anything had historically taken decades. The report did not note what was happening in the shipyards. On New Lagos, the night crew was running double shifts. On New Helsinki, Colonel HFY had personally requisitioned 7 patrol vessels and 1 heavy transport from the Colony Defense Reserve. The Jovian Station, which had no real military tradition and was generally considered the most peaceable of the 11 colonies, quietly contributed 4 ships because the station's senior engineer had a grandfather who kept a framed star map on his wall with one system circled in red marker. He had asked about it every year growing up. His grandfather had never explained it. He had understood it anyway. From Nueva Cartagena, a single older cruiser, not fast, not impressive, Tomás Viguosa had called in a favor with the colonial governor, which had surprised the governor considerably since Tomás Viguosa had never called in a favor in his life. He had simply said, "I want that ship at Saul." The governor had not asked why. Ships from 11 worlds, built to 11 different specs, running on 11 different operational systems, requiring translators for their own combined communications channel. A logistics problem that, on paper, should have taken years to coordinate. It took 87 days. No single person ordered the assembly. Saren had sent the coordinates and the date. After that, it was like calling a frequency and finding it had always been there. Ships moved. They moved in the same direction. They arrived at the Sol system within a 6-hour window of each other, which their own engineers later called mathematically improbable, and which none of the crews thought was strange at all. It did not feel like a military operation. It felt like coming home to a place you had never been. Colonel Priya Akafer took command of the combined fleet by default. She was the only senior defense officer present, and she was, as several people observed, the only person nobody argued with. She stood on the bridge of the new Helsinki Dawn and looked at the formation on her screen, ships of 17 different sizes, mismatched. Slightly absurd, arrayed in orbit above a pale blue-green planet, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Position holding, no weapons active, no aggressive signals, we are here, that is all." That was all. Below them, Earth turned. She had seen photographs. Everyone had seen photographs, the old ones from before, of what it had looked like. She had also seen the satellite data that Saren had pulled. She thought she had been prepared. She was not prepared. Even from orbit through the viewport, there was a quality to it she had not expected. Something in the way the light moved across the surface. The cloud systems, imperfect and irregular, moving like something breathing. The equatorial band of green, patchy and stubborn. The Atlantic, that color, that specific color, that had no right to exist and existed anyway. She looked at it for a while, then she turned back to her screens. The Vreth extraction fleet arrived on day 90. 40 ships, sleek, dark, enormously capable. They moved with the ease of a civilization that had been doing this for longer than human civilization had existed. They were not aggressive. They did not need to be. Their lead ship opened a channel. "Human vessels, you are positioned in a designated resource reclamation corridor. This system is cleared for extraction under Consortium Standard Clause 7. Please clear the corridor." Akafer looked at the channel. She looked at her communications officer. Then she turned to the external camera array. "Full spectrum, broadcast to every ship in this system." "Broadcasting." She turned the cameras toward Earth. She did not respond to the Vreth. She did not make a statement. She did not cite the amendment or recite the rule or explain why they were there or what they were prepared to do. She simply opened every screen on every ship in the vicinity, Vreth, Consortium observer vessels, her own fleet, and she showed them Earth. The planet as it was right now, live, unfiltered. The light on the equatorial green, the Atlantic, the slow movement of clouds over what had once been the Mediterranean, the ice at the poles, not what it was, but more than what it had been at year 50. The Terminator line moving across the face of the planet, the precise edge of shadow and light. The channel stayed open. Nobody spoke. The Vreth had surveyed this system by automated probe. They had processed numbers, chemical compositions, mineral yield projections. They had not watched it. There is a difference between data and watching, and the Vreth, who were very old and very intelligent and had seen more worlds than humans could count, were not immune to that difference. "Human vessels," the Vreth lead ship said after a long pause. "We request a 72-hour communication suspension pending internal review." Akafer nodded at her communications officer. "Granted," she said. The Vreth fleet held position. The human fleet held position. Earth turned beneath all of them, doing what it had been doing for 180 years, which was surviving without being asked, and without being helped, and without any particular expectation that anyone would notice. The message came at 3 a.m., Nueva Cartagena time. Saren was in her temporary quarters on the new Helsinki Dawn, not sleeping, sitting at the small desk with her tablet and her cold coffee, reviewing legal precedents she had already reviewed 4 times. The comm chimed. She looked at it. Nueva Cartagena Colony Authority, Tomás Vigouosai, notification of death, natural causes, time of death, 11:52 p.m. local time, next of kin notified. She set the comm face down on the desk. She sat still. The message had been sent 3 hours ago. He had been gone for 3 hours while she sat here reading legal texts, and he had been gone and she had not known. The room was very quiet. Through the small porthole above the desk, Earth was visible. She had specifically requested a room with an Earth-facing porthole, a thing she had not admitted to anyone. She looked at it. She thought about his kitchen, the tea with the broad, dark leaves, the way he had held the jar without knowing he was holding it. She did tell me one thing. The floor was very loud when it was empty. She thought he died with the jar in his hands. She did not know this for a fact. She believed it entirely. She stayed at the porthole for a long time, not moving, not reading, just looking at the planet below, which was doing what it had always done, slowly, stubbornly, without drama or announcement, becoming more itself. She did not tell anyone until morning. When she told Akafor, the colonel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The consortium decision is expected within the hour." "I know," Saren said. "Are you all right?" Saren looked out the bridge viewport. Earth was on the other side of the ship right now, not visible. She could feel where it was anyway, the way you can feel where a window is in a dark room. "Ask me after," she said. Akafor nodded and did not ask again. The consortium decision came 40 minutes later. It was 17 pages of dense legal language. Saren read every page. The conclusion was on page 16. Amendment notation, abandonment accord, human evacuation record year post-Exodus, hereby reclassified as binding cultural legal instrument. Earth, Sol system, third planet, granted protected status, class 1, effective immediately. Vreth collective resource petition denied. Standard reclamation clause 7 superseded by cultural legal instrument precedent. This decision is final and sets galactic precedent for all future abandonment accord amendments. Final precedent setting. She read it twice. Then she set her tablet down. Outside the viewport, the amber light of Kepler 9b was nowhere. There was only the black of space and the distant light of the sun, and if she moved 3 feet to the right, the pale turning shape of Earth. She moved 3 feet to the right. She stood there. She did not feel like she had expected to feel. She had expected something larger, something with more noise to it. Instead, there was just this, the planet below continuing, the quiet of the bridge, the small, solid fact of what had just been decided. It was enough. It was more than enough. The Vreth left without ceremony. 40 ships, moving in the smooth and efficient formation of a civilization that had been traveling between stars since before humans had discovered fire. They did not protest the consortium's decision. The Vreth were old enough to understand that some decisions were simply facts now, and arguing with facts was a thing younger species did. They filed a formal objection, 9 pages, procedural, the kind of thing you filed because the charter required it, not because you expected it to change anything. And then they turned and left the Sol system in the direction they had come. Their internal report on the incident, which was eventually shared with the consortium as part of standard diplomatic protocol, was thorough and precise and completely baffled. It described the human fleet in accurate technical terms. It described the broadcast of Earth's image with appropriate detail. It described the 72-hour communication suspension and the subsequent review. And then, in its conclusion, it said something that was translated into a dozen species languages and discussed in consortium academic circles for years afterward. We have encountered species that value their origin worlds. We have encountered species that grieve their origin worlds. We have not previously encountered a species that, 180 years after departure, mobilized a cross-system fleet at significant material and political cost, with no unified command in 87 days for a planet that cannot give them anything. Our behavioral models do not account for this. We recommend non-engagement with humanity in all matters relating to the Sol system, pending further study. Further study took decades. They never filed a satisfactory report. Saren returned to Nueva Cartagena before going back to Kepler 9b. She did not announce it. She did not tell the colonial authority or the governor or the news organizations that had been very interested in her since the consortium's decision came down. She booked a standard commercial transit, took an aisle seat, and arrived at the port on a morning when the air smelled of something like the coast, and the light was doing the thing it always did. She walked to Tomaz's building. She had called ahead. The building's administrator had been expecting her, had said the room was as he left it, that they had been waiting for next of kin to retrieve his things. His son was on New Lagos and couldn't travel for another month. Saren said she would take care of it. The room was quiet. The tea plant on the windowsill still had water in its tray. Someone had been taking care of it. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at everything. The photographs, she had not noticed them the first visit. She had been focused on him. Now she looked. People she didn't recognize, spanning many decades. Occasions she couldn't name. The particular texture of a life lived carefully and with attention. A framed photograph above the desk. A woman in a uniform, standing at what appeared to be an enormous empty room, looking at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile but was not quite not a smile. Adiz Nwasu. Saren recognized her from the historical files, younger here than in the official photographs, not posed. Someone had caught her when she wasn't ready to be photographed. She looked like someone who had just done something very hard and was deciding whether it was worth it and arriving slowly at yes. Saren looked at the desk. The jar was there, where he had left it, where it had always been. She picked it up. It weighed almost nothing. Dark reddish soil pressed to the glass on one side where it had settled over years of being handled. Completely sterile, completely useless. The kind of thing that had no practical value and could not be explained except by understanding what it meant to the person who carried it, and then it was the most obvious thing in the world. She held it for a while. She put it in her bag. The Yulhari attaché requested a meeting 6 months after the consortium ruling. The Yulhari were one of the oldest species in the consortium. They communicated through bioluminescent patterns that moved across their skin, colors and shapes that their translators had spent 2 centuries slowly, imperfectly converting into spoken language. They were patient in the way that geology is patient. You did not hurry a conversation with a Yulhari. You had the conversation or you didn't, and if you did, you gave it the time it needed. The meeting was in a small room in the consortium's diplomatic wing on the central station. Just Saren and the Yulhari attaché, whose name in translated approximation was something like Stillwater. The translator was present but quiet. The attaché's bioluminescent patterns ran slow and blue as they settled into the chair across from her. Saren waited. "We have observed 31 species evacuations," the attaché began. The translator rendered the light patterns into words, flat and a little late but accurate. "We have a record of every species' relationship with their origin world across time. There is a pattern. The first generation grieves. The second generation carries the grief as inheritance. The third generation knows the grief intellectually but does not feel it in the same way. By the fourth and fifth generation, the origin world becomes history, important history, honored history, but history. The species transfers its attachment to the new home. This is normal. This is what we see." Saren nodded. "You did not do this," the attaché said. "No." The slow blue patterns moved across Stillwater's skin. We would like to understand why, not for any strategic purpose. We are simply, the word your language offers is curious. We find it insufficient, but it is the closest available. Saren thought about the meeting rooms, the 9 hours of shouting, the person who cried and the person who told them it wasn't a strategy. She thought about Tamaz picking up the jar without knowing he was doing it. She thought about Akafir saying with force implied and picking up her pen with both eyes open. She thought about the Jovian station engineer whose grandfather had a map with one system circled in red. She thought about what it had felt like to stand at that porthole at 3 in the morning, with her tablet face down on the desk and her cold coffee untouched, looking at a planet she had never set foot on and feeling something she did not have a precise word for. She thought about her grandmother. Baby, you need to make some calls. Not we have to fight, not we must resist, just that. Make the calls, as if there were never another option, as if it had been obvious from the first word. Think, Saren said slowly, that the attachment didn't transfer because we didn't let it. Each generation made a choice, not consciously maybe, but they kept teaching the next one that the grief was real and that the place was real and that the rule meant something. And eventually it becomes a thing you are, not a thing you feel. You stop feeling it the way you feel sadness. You just are it. The way you are left-handed or the way you are the kind of person who tells the truth. It's not something you do. It's something you are. She stopped. She looked at her hands. The jar was in her bag. She could feel the weight of it even though it weighed almost nothing. We drew a line, she said. In the middle of leaving everything with nothing in our hands, we drew a line and said this is who we are. And then we just kept being that for 180 years, across 11 worlds. We just kept being the kind of thing that drew that line. The bioluminescent patterns on Stillwater's skin shifted. The color changed, moved from blue into something slower and deeper, a shade the translator had no word for. The attaché sat with it for a long time. We think we understand, Stillwater said finally. We think it is not about the planet. No, Saren said, it never was. It is about the kind of thing that makes a rule like that. Yes. And means it. Yes. The patterns moved slowly, deep and quiet. The translator was silent. There were no words for what the Yulhari was expressing, just color and light, something old and careful, and if Saren was reading it right, something that might have been the closest thing to respect that a civilization old enough to remember the formation of stars was capable of showing to one that had just learned to cross them. The consortium updated its species classification for humanity that quarter. The update was administrative, routine. It appeared on page 47 of the consortium's annual species registry bulletin, between an update on Vreth population distribution and a note about Yulhari diplomatic appointments. 31 species had been filed under the same heading since the registry began: displaced, adaptive, recovered. The heading meant left their home, adjusted, moved on, standard. Humanity was the first species in consortium history to be removed from that heading and given a new one. The consortium's linguistic team debated the translation for 8 months. The challenge was that no existing consortium classification had the right shape for what they were trying to say. They went through 11 drafts. They consulted the Yulhari, who were the oldest members and had the largest vocabulary for things that were hard to name. The final translation was 2 words. Not dangerous. Not militarized. Not unpredictable, though that was in the running. When the bulletin went out and the translated classification reached the human colonial news networks, it spread in the way that things spread when they are exactly right, fast, without needing explanation. The way a word in your own language sometimes lands in your chest before your brain finishes reading it. Saren read it on her tablet in her office on Kepler 9b on a Tuesday morning. She had her coffee. The amber light was coming through the window. Her queue had 51 items. She had not yet started working through it. She read the 2 words. She put the tablet down. She opened her bag, which was under her desk, and she took out the jar, and she set it on her desk, and she looked at it for a while. Then she picked up her coffee and started on item 1. On her desk, in the light, the dark soil pressed against the glass was the color of her grandmother's photograph of a coastline she had never seen, the color of a garden in Enugu, the color of something left in trust. The Consortium's new classification for humanity. Still home,